At 6:14 on a Tuesday morning, my wife's phone lit up on the kitchen island hard enough to make the ceramic sugar bowl tremble. I wasn't trying to read it. I only looked because she had left it face up beside the fruit basket, and the screen kept flashing over and over while she was upstairs in the shower. The first preview said, 30 more days. Then I'm out. He still has no idea. The second one came 3 seconds later. Book the Friday flight. Don't lose your nerve now. And then the third, the one that turned my hand cold around my coffee mug. Once Daniel's bonus hits, everything gets easier. My name looks strange when it's sitting inside another man's plan. For a second I just stared at the screen while the coffee machine hissed behind me and the water pipes clicked in the walls. There are moments in life when the whole room stays ordinary while your understanding of it changes shape forever. That was one of them. Same kitchen. Same pale oak cabinets Claire had insisted on. Same basil plant dying slowly beside the sink because neither of us ever remembered to water it on time. Same Tuesday. Same marriage. Different truth. Her phone dimmed, and some dumb part of me almost felt relief, like maybe if the light went out then the message could go with it. It didn't. I picked the phone up because I told myself I was only going to set its screen down so I wouldn't see anything else. That was the lie I told myself in order to touch it. But the screen woke in my hand, still unlocked from whatever she'd been doing before she went upstairs, and the message thread opened right there under my thumb. His name was saved as Nina Yoga. That made me laugh once, very softly, with absolutely no humor in it. Under the fake contact name was a month of messages. Airline screenshots. Apartment listings. A photo of a closet with half her dresses missing from the rack. A message from Claire sent at 11:42 the night before, I can do 30 more days. He's trying so hard lately it almost makes me feel bad. And his reply, don't. You gave him enough years. Take what you can and come start your real life. Take what you can. I stood there in the half-light of our kitchen in bare feet and a wrinkled t-shirt, and I felt something in me go very still. Not rage. Not yet. Rage is hot. It moves fast. It wants noise. What I felt was colder than that. Cleaner. The kind of cold that makes you put things back exactly where you found them. I scrolled 2 pages up, 2 pages down, just enough to understand the shape of it. The Friday flight was 30 days away. There were references to money, to the bonus my firm paid every August, to a storage unit I knew nothing about, to the possibility that I'd make it ugly if I found out early. Then I heard the water shut off upstairs. I set the phone exactly where it had been. When Claire came down 10 minutes later, her hair damp at the ends, wearing the gray robe I bought her in Vancouver 3 winters ago, I was standing at the stove making her eggs the way she liked them. Soft scramble. Chives. Pepper. No cheese. She kissed my cheek and said, "You're up early." I smiled and said, "Couldn't sleep." That part, at least, was true. For the next 30 days, I became the best husband I had ever been. Not because I wanted to save my marriage. Because I wanted to see the whole plan before she tried to walk away with my life folded inside her suitcase. And because if you've ever been betrayed by someone who still reaches for your hand across the breakfast counter, then you know this already. Sometimes the calmest person in the room is not the least hurt. He is just the one who has decided not to bleed in public. Before I tell you what I did with those 30 days, you need to understand Claire the way I understood her before the messages turned her into someone else. We had been married for 7 years. Together for 9. I met her at a fundraiser I didn't want to attend, for a children's literacy nonprofit my firm sponsored mostly because one of our senior partners liked being photographed in black tie beside hopeful slogans. Claire was running the registration table. Navy dress. Gold earrings. Hair tucked behind one ear in that accidental way that always looks more intentional than people think. She made a joke when she couldn't find my name tag, and I remember noticing that she made direct eye contact when she talked, like she expected the world to answer back. At that point in my life, directness impressed me. I was 33, a senior operations strategist at a medical supply company that had grown too quickly and kept hiring me to clean up the parts no one else wanted to own. Warehousing failures. Vendor disputes. Distribution gaps. Forecasting errors. I was good at hard systems and soft disasters. I had spent most of my 20s becoming the kind of man who solved problems before other people realized there was one. Claire made me feel, for a little while, like I didn't have to solve anything when I was with her. She worked in events then. Creative. Warm. Social in the easy, generous way that made people tell her too much about themselves. I was quieter, more methodical, better in small rooms than big ones. She told me once that I made her feel safe. I told her she made me feel less tired. That should have been a warning, maybe. Not because it was false. Because it was true in a way that asks too much from love. When we got engaged, I bought a small 3-bedroom house in Oak Park with a maple tree in front and a cracked brick walkway that listed to one side when it rained. Claire walked through the empty living room in socks and started talking before I finished unlocking the back door. Breakfast nook there. Built-ins here. Tear out the old tile. Replace the light fixtures. Open shelves in the kitchen. She had that look in her eye that people get when they aren't seeing what exists. They're seeing what can exist once enough money is applied to it. I loved that look back then. I financed the down payment myself because I had the savings and she had student loans plus a credit card balance she was still untangling from her 20s. It didn't bother me. Marriage, to me, was always a we equation. One structure. Shared load. Shared gain. I came from a family where if one person had something steady, everybody leaned on it until the next person found footing. My father drove city buses for 31 years. My mother taught second grade in a public school that always needed more paper, more books, more patience, more everything. They never had much extra, but whatever they had was never guarded with sharp elbows. Claire came from a different kind of house. More polished. More careful. Her father owned 2 dental clinics. Her mother had opinions about cuff links, coasters, and whether the wine had been allowed to breathe. They weren't cruel, exactly. Just the kind of family that treated taste like character evidence. Claire had grown up with a strong awareness of what things looked like from the outside. I mistook that for refinement. Sometimes refinement is just anxiety dressed better. The first 3 years of our marriage were, from any outside angle, a success story. I moved into a director role, then into vice president of operations at a healthcare logistics firm that supplied surgical centers across 4 states. Long hours. High pressure. Better money. Claire left events and tried freelance brand consulting, then social media management, then a small interior styling business she ran half from our guest room and half from mood boards laid across the dining table. Every time one venture stalled, I covered the gap. I told myself that was partnership. And sometimes it was. I paid the mortgage. Utilities. Insurance. Most travel. Her business software subscriptions. The designer printer she swore would elevate her client work. The photography package for her website relaunch. The custom shelving for her sample library. The storage fee when the sample library outgrew the shelving. The 6-month branding course she said would finally help her scale. I didn't resent it, not then. What I resented, if I'm honest, were the performances around it. The way she would tell friends, Daniel's just more conservative with money, when what she meant was Daniel is paying while I experiment. The way she said our house when she wanted credit for its beauty and your office when a repair bill came due. The way her mother once laughed over dinner and said, "Well, thank God one of you knows how to create atmosphere," and Claire squeezed my knee under the table like that made it charming. None of those moments end a marriage. They do, however, train a person to excuse small humiliations because nothing dramatic enough has happened yet to justify refusing them. By year 5, the texture of things had shifted. Not all at once. Marriages rarely fracture with cinematic discipline. Mostly they wear grooves. A late meeting that becomes a pattern. A turned-over phone. A new password. A spouse who becomes less interested in where you are emotionally and more interested in whether you can take care of one more practical need before bedtime. Claire grew sharper with me in private and sweeter with me in public. That is a dangerous combination. People assume the smiling version is the real one because it photographs better. The first Real crack appeared 2 years before the messages, though I didn't name it correctly at the time. Claire had started working out at a boutique studio 3 neighborhoods over. Yoga at first, then reformer classes, then weekend workshops, then girls' breakfasts with women from the studio whose names rotated often enough that I never learned which ones were real friends and which ones were convenient alibis. She bought matching sets in muted colors. Started leaving earlier to do her hair before classes. Began carrying her phone from room to room with the absent vigilance of someone trying not to look vigilant. I noticed it all. I just explained it away. Because when you love somebody, you often become the first employee of their cover story. There were other clues. She became interested in my compensation calendar in a way she never had been before. Not the gross annual number. She already knew that. She wanted to know timing. Vesting dates. Bonus windows. Whether this year's payout would come in 1 transfer or 2. Whether the equity distribution from a board advisory position would hit the same month. All reasonable questions inside a marriage. All less reasonable in hindsight when paired with plain confirmations and secret apartment browsing. 6 months before that Tuesday morning, she had suggested we postpone trying for a baby. Her explanation made sense. She said she wanted our routines to feel calmer first. She wanted to feel more certain in her business. She wanted to travel this year while we still could. I agreed because I thought agreement was tenderness. Later, reading messages between her and Nina Yoga, whose real name turned out to be Evan Mercer even though he was no relation of mine, I found the line that made the back of my neck feel like ice. Not bringing a child into this before I'm free. I'm not that stupid. You can survive a lot inside a marriage if you know it is being said to your face. It is the sentences spoken elsewhere, in comfort, in confidence, to someone who benefits from your ignorance, that change the chemistry of memory. After Claire went to work that Tuesday, I sat at the kitchen table until my coffee went cold. Then I did what I have always done when a structure reveals damage. I assessed. No shouting. No dramatic texts. No calling her 10 times in a row. No rushing to be the wrong kind of man in the right kind of pain. I opened my laptop. First, I wrote down everything I had seen while it was still exact in my mind. The fake contact name. The phrase 30 more days. The mention of my bonus. The Friday flight. The storage unit. The apartment search. The sentence about taking what you can. Then I checked our shared financial dashboard. Nothing missing yet. Joint checking normal. Household account normal. Renovation savings intact. Credit card usage slightly higher than usual on her card, but not by enough to trigger anything. A few boutique charges. 2 rideshare receipts downtown on afternoons she'd told me she was with clients. A restaurant bill I didn't recognize on a Wednesday she had supposedly eaten protein bars between appointments. I printed the statements. Then I called the only person I trusted to hear the whole thing without turning it into either pity or revenge. My friend Marcus. Marcus and I had been roommates in business school. He now practiced family law in River North and billed at a rate that made normal people stand up straighter in their chairs. He answered on the second ring. If this is about golf on Saturday, he said, I'm still not playing 9 holes in August humidity just because you think misery builds character. I said, I need a lawyer. There was a beat. Then his voice flattened into something professional. What happened? I told him enough to make the picture clear. He listened without interrupting. That is one of the reasons he's good. Most people want to place their feelings inside your crisis while it is still warm. Marcus lets facts arrive first. When I finished, he said, do not confront her today. I said, I wasn't planning to. Good. Second, do not move money in a way that looks punitive. We do this clean. Third, screen records, statements, and legal documents. Quietly. Can you meet me at noon? I could. At noon I was sitting in his conference room on the 23rd floor with a leather folio in front of me and 3 printed bank statements I had folded too hard in my briefcase. His office overlooked the river. Boats moved below us in white lines through green water. People were eating salads on terraces and talking into wireless headsets like life still made uncomplicated sense. Marcus read everything, then leaned back. You have options, he said. The first thing we need is clarity on assets, exposure, and timing. If she's planning a departure around your bonus, then don't give her access to an event she's scheduling against. We can separate future income. We can protect inherited property. We can document spending. But we do it correctly. No traps. No illegal monitoring. No theatrics that make you look unstable. I nodded. He slid a yellow pad toward me and started making a list. Open new personal account at a different bank. Redirect bonus and board compensation immediately. Inventory jewelry, watches, family items, records. Pull credit reports. Change beneficiary designations where permitted. Review title documents. Copy tax returns. Check whether she is an authorized user anywhere non-essential. Do not leave the house voluntarily. Document behavior. Dates. Expenditures. Statements. And Daniel, he added, watch for cash withdrawals. I looked at him. Why cash? Because people planning to disappear with a story usually like money that doesn't leave a trail. I drove back to the office feeling hollow in a highly organized way. That afternoon Claire texted me at 3:11. How's your day, handsome? I stared at the screen long enough to see my own face reflected in it. Then I typed, busy but good. Dinner at home tonight? I can pick up that pesto pasta you like. She replied with a heart. That night I brought flowers. White ranunculus. Her favorite. I cooked. I asked about her clients. I listened. I laughed in the right places. When she touched my wrist, I did not pull away. When she asked if we could do a weekend in Lake Geneva later that month, I said yes. When she came to bed and curled against my chest with the familiarity of long practice, I lay awake looking at the ceiling fan and counting the days backward from the flight I had seen on her phone. 30. 29. 28. People like to imagine betrayal is only painful in the big scenes. It isn't. The big scene is almost a relief because at least the truth has finally stopped hiding in ordinary gestures. What hurts is the repetition. The toothbrush beside yours. The little grocery list on the counter in her handwriting. The text that says, should I pick up lemons? From someone who is actively planning a future in which your kitchen is no longer hers. By the end of the first week, I had a system. Every night after Claire fell asleep, I went downstairs with my notebook and documented the day. Time she left. Time she returned. Charges that posted. Inconsistencies in stories. Anything she mentioned that connected to the messages I had seen. Not because I wanted to obsess. Because accurate records calm me. Facts create edges. Pain without edges becomes a swamp. I also started building distance inside the systems she benefited from without noticing they existed. Payroll redirected my compensation to a new individual account by Friday. The quarterly board payment from a small medical software company where I sat as an outside advisor was routed there too. I removed her as the authorized user on a corporate card she'd only used twice and would likely never notice until she tried. I updated my life insurance beneficiary from spouse to trust. I moved my mother's jewelry, my grandfather's watch, and the small envelope of bonds my father bought for me when I was born into a safe deposit box. Not to punish her. To prevent confusion later about what had always been mine. Claire didn't notice any of this because Claire had never been interested in the plumbing behind the walls. She liked fixtures. Surfaces. The warm light and the finished room. I had always been the one who made sure the water pressure held. On day 6, I learned who Evan was. Not from snooping. From LinkedIn, because once you know a name and a city and a yoga studio, it takes about 90 seconds to reconstruct the life someone thinks is discreet. Evan Mercer. 38. Real estate acquisitions consultant. Previously with a mid-sized development group that specialized in adaptive reuse projects. Good headshot. Aggressive jawline. The kind of man whose profile uses words like growth, vision, and transformational strategy without ever once revealing what he actually does when a deal goes sideways. He was divorced. By the second week, I began to understand the architecture of their plan. Not every detail. Enough. Claire was waiting for my August performance bonus, which had been unusually large because our firm had just completed a brutal but successful integration of 2 failing distribution networks in Ohio and western Pennsylvania. For 9 months I had lived inside conference calls, labor disputes, shipping delays, software conversions, warehouse redesigns, and acquisition fallout. I had missed dinners. Cancelled a long weekend. Fallen asleep twice on the couch with spreadsheets still open on my laptop. Claire had complained then, often and with conviction, that I was emotionally unavailable and married to work. Now I was reading our credit card statements and realizing she had apparently decided to remain married to my compensation. Marcus filed the preliminary paperwork in silence. Not full divorce yet. Protective groundwork. Documentation. Drafts ready when I said go. We met twice that week, once in his office and once at a coffee shop where 2 students beside us were debating whether relationships failed because people changed or because they finally stopped performing who they thought they needed to be. Neither, Marcus said after we got up to leave. Most fail because one person thinks secrecy is a manageable side project. I asked him if I was being insane by waiting 30 days. He said, no. You're being strategic, assuming you stay inside the law and inside yourself. Inside yourself. That phrase stayed with me. On day 11, she came into my office around 9 p.m. wearing one of my old college sweatshirts and carrying 2 mugs of tea. She set one beside my laptop, leaned against the doorframe, and said, I miss you. By day 14, the first financial irregularity surfaced. A cash withdrawal. Not huge. $900. From a branch in Wicker Park on a Monday afternoon when she told me she was meeting a florist about a corporate lobby install. Then another 2 days later. $600. Then a charge for a storage facility under a business debit card I paid the monthly balance on because, technically, it was linked to her styling business. Marcus smiled without humor when I showed him. There it is, he said. Preparation behavior. He advised me not to cut the card yet. Let it run a little longer. Let the pattern establish itself. We would have enough to document misuse if needed, but sudden interference could alert her before the legal mechanisms were positioned. So I waited. Waiting is underrated because it feels passive when it is actually one of the hardest forms of control. One Friday near the middle of the month, Claire asked if I had finalized the date of my bonus deposit. We were in the car on the way to dinner, and she said it lightly, the same way someone might ask whether a package had arrived. Should be the last week of the month, I said. She nodded, looking out the window. Good. We should probably decide what to do with it before it just disappears into bills. I kept my eyes on the road. What did you have in mind? She smiled. Maybe finally book Italy. Or redo the primary bath. Or put more into savings and be adults. The way she said be adults nearly impressed me. I said, let's talk about it when it lands. She rested her hand on my knee for the rest of the drive. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat on the edge of our bed in the dark and understood something ugly and clarifying. Claire did not think of deception as a fracture in the relationship. She thought of it as project management. That realization stripped away the last of my confusion. Hurt remained. Hope didn't. Week 3 was when the emotional weather changed. Not outside. Inside me. One night on day 19, I woke at 2:03 a.m. and found Claire's side of the bed empty. I went downstairs and saw the light from her phone under the partially closed study door. She was sitting at the desk in one of my t-shirts, knees tucked up, whispering. I could have listened. I didn't. I walked back upstairs and lay in bed staring into the dark until she returned 17 minutes later and slid under the blanket with the faint smell of mint gum on her breath. In the morning she said she'd been ordering product samples from a supplier in California and had forgotten the time difference. I said, got it. There is a special fatigue that comes from answering lies with courtesy. By then my preparations were almost complete. Marcus had drafted the divorce filing, the temporary financial orders, and a clean property schedule. Because the house had been purchased before marriage and because the down payment, title history, and major principal contributions were traceable, the legal terrain was better for me than Claire probably imagined. The bonus, because it had not yet hit any joint account and because payroll changes had been made in advance, was also protected. We prepared a temporary support proposal that was fair, more fair than some people in my position would have offered, because I had no desire to look vindictive in front of a judge. I did, however, intend to be impossible to exploit. I also met with a financial advisor and restructured a few things Claire would never have thought about. Passwords. Access rights. Beneficiary layers. Emergency contacts. Digital vaults. The unromantic machinery that underlies adult life. Marriage gives a person visibility into more of that machinery than most people realize. Divorce teaches you how exposed you were. On day 21, I found the storage unit. Again, not through any illegal magic. A receipt had posted to her business card, and the vendor code gave me the company name. One call from Marcus's office through the proper discovery channels confirmed there was a unit leased under her business name. We couldn't search it. We didn't need to. The lease start date was enough. It began 3 weeks before the messages I saw. 3 weeks. That meant while Claire was asking me whether I thought we should host Thanksgiving this year, she was already moving pieces of her life into a locked metal box across town. When I got home, Claire was in the kitchen arranging tulips in a glass vase. You disappeared, she said. I was getting worried. I looked at her hands in the water and thought, worried about what? Instead I said, needed some air. She came over, touched my arm, and asked if I was okay. I said, just tired. There is a point in prolonged betrayal where dignity becomes a private form of rebellion. That is where I lived for the last third of those 30 days. I stopped wondering whether I should confront her and started deciding how I wanted to remember myself when it was over. Not the marriage. Myself. That mattered. Because endings brand you. Not only with what was done to you, but with what you became while it was happening. I did not want to become a man who screamed through hallways, smashed glass, or let somebody else's deception recruit him into ugliness. I wanted to become a man who saw clearly, moved carefully, and left with his self-respect intact. So I kept being kind. Not fake kind. Precise kind. I made coffee every morning. I asked about her day and listened to the answer. I fixed the loose hinge on the mudroom cabinet she'd mentioned twice. I sent flowers to her pop-up styling event with a card that said proud of you. I booked us an anniversary dinner at the restaurant where we had gone after we signed closing papers on the house, because our actual anniversary was 2 days before the flight and I wanted the final scene to occur on ground I controlled. Claire seemed moved by all of it. Or guilty. Or both. The difference stopped mattering. On day 24, Marcus called with the update we had been waiting for. The paperwork was ready to file immediately after disclosure. Process server on standby if needed. Financial notices prepared. He asked if I wanted the confrontation to happen at home, in his office, or through formal service after she left. I said, home would turn ugly. Service after she left gives her too much room to invent a version of me. I want one conversation. One clear handoff. Then the structure changes. He was quiet for a second. And how are you planning to do that? I looked through the conference room window at the parking garage across the street and said, I know when her flight is. He said, Daniel, careful. I said, I'm not blocking her. I'm not following her. I'm not creating a scene. I just want her to understand that I knew, that she's not taking anything else, and that she doesn't get to narrate me as the husband who was too blind to see it coming. Marcus exhaled slowly. Then do it with witnesses nearby and without raising your voice. That became the plan. The flight was scheduled for Friday, 7:20 p.m., direct to Seattle. The anniversary dinner reservation was for Thursday at 8 p.m. On Thursday morning, I received my bonus confirmation from payroll. Deposited. Into the new account. I looked at the number once, then closed the email. Claire texted me around lunch. Did the bonus come through? I replied. Yes. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, came back. Amazing. We should celebrate tonight. I smiled in spite of myself at the audacity. Already handled, I wrote. Wear the black dress. She responded with a heart and a flame. The black dress was the one she wore on our 3rd anniversary. Silk. Open back. Minimal jewelry because the dress did the work. She came downstairs that evening looking exactly like the woman every room forgives too easily. I was in a charcoal suit and a white shirt, no tie. She looked me over and said, wow. What's the occasion? I said, I thought we deserved a proper night. On the drive downtown, she was brighter than she'd been in months. Not tender. Energized. Like someone standing with one foot already outside a life and finding the final performance easier because the contract is nearly over. She talked about Italy again. About maybe taking a break somewhere warm this fall. About how she felt like we had finally found each other again after a hard season. Each sentence landed with almost scientific precision. Hard season. Found each other again. Warm. I answered gently and let her build the stage she would shortly fall through. Dinner was excellent. That is the strange thing about catastrophic evenings. The bread still arrives warm. The waiter still recommends the sea base. Candles still flatter the guilty. Claire touched my hand twice across the table and thanked me for planning something so thoughtful. Midway through dessert, she said, I know I haven't made it easy lately. I held her gaze. No, you haven't. She smiled in a sad, practiced way. I just mean, thank you for not giving up on me. I almost admired it. Almost. When the bill came, I paid. We walked outside into humid August air, and she slipped her arm through mine. We stood on the sidewalk beneath the restaurant awning waiting for the valet. Traffic hissed past on wet pavement from a brief rain earlier. Claire leaned her head on my shoulder. Then I said, there's one more thing. She looked up. From inside my jacket, I took a cream envelope and handed it to her. She laughed softly. You got me another gift. Open it. She did. Inside were copies, not originals. Her flight itinerary. The storage unit lease. 3 printed screenshots I had recreated from memory with notes and dates the lawyer had helped me organize after subsequent financial evidence supported the timeline. A draft divorce filing. A letter from my attorney regarding temporary financial arrangements. And on top, a single page in my handwriting. I know about Evan. I know about the flight tomorrow. I know about the plan to wait for my bonus. The money is no longer accessible to you. The house is not available to take from me. Your personal items will be available for pickup through counsel. You should still go if you want to. But you will go with the truth, not with my life packed underneath it. For the first time in 30 days, Claire looked unprepared. Not sad. Not furious. Unprepared. Her face changed in stages. Confusion first. Then calculation. Then fear. Daniel, she said very quietly. I didn't answer. She looked from the papers to me and back again. Her fingers trembled once at the edge of the envelope. How long have you known? 30 days. The color left her face. 30. I nodded. Since your phone lit up on the kitchen counter. She stared at me like the floor had moved. You went through my phone. That was what she chose first. Not I'm sorry. Not please let me explain. Not this isn't what it looks like. You went through my phone. I said, it unlocked in my hand after your messages lit up the room. Everything after that was just your decisions introducing themselves. She swallowed hard. People were moving around us, waiting for cars, checking watches, opening rideshare apps, living their unrelated lives while my marriage came apart under an awning. Claire lowered her voice further. This isn't. Daniel, this isn't as simple as it looks. I said, it looked like flight confirmations, cash withdrawals, a storage unit, and a plan built around my bonus. If there is a more complicated interpretation, now would be the time. Tears came fast then, as if she had kept them in a bag with a tearaway seam for emergencies. I wasn't going to take everything, she whispered. I almost laughed. Only the amount you could justify to yourself. She shook her head. No, it wasn't like that. I didn't know how to leave. There it was. The word leave. Simple. Clean. Unadorned. She wasn't denying him. Wasn't denying the flight. Wasn't denying the timeline. Only contesting the manner of theft. I asked, how long? She closed her eyes. A year. The street noise seemed to recede for a second. A year. 12 months of breakfasts, holidays, dinner parties, mortgage payments, wedding anniversaries, and little absent-minded kisses by the pantry door, all while she was carrying another life folded inside her phone. I said, did you ever plan to tell me before you were gone? She said nothing. That was answer enough. When she opened her eyes again, she looked frightened in a way I had not seen before. What's going to happen now? It was almost childlike, that question. As though adulthood was something happening to her from the outside. I said, tomorrow you can decide whether you're still taking the flight. Tonight you are not coming back to the house. Her head snapped up. What? I booked you a room at the Palmer. One night. Paid through noon. Your essentials are already there. That, more than the papers, stunned her. I had done it at 5 p.m., after leaving the office. A suitcase of basics packed by a professional service Marcus recommended for high-conflict transitions. Toiletries, undergarments, 2 casual outfits, a charger, makeup bag, medications from our bathroom photographed and transferred. No sentimental items. No room for theatrical claims that I had stranded her without necessities. You're serious, she said. I looked at her for a long moment. Claire, I have been serious for 30 days. She started crying harder then, enough that a woman near the valet stand glanced over and then away. Claire reached for my arm, and for the first time all month I stepped back before she could touch me. "Please don't do this like some transaction," she said. I felt something bitter rise and settle again. "You already did." She covered her mouth. "I didn't mean. I know exactly what you meant. You just assumed I wouldn't see it before the balance sheet closed." She kept shaking her head as if motion could loosen facts. "Daniel, I was unhappy." I said, "Unhappiness explains departure. It does not explain planning it around someone else's deposit schedule." A valet pulled our car forward. The young man behind the wheel had no idea he was arriving in the middle of a burial. I handed Claire a second envelope. Hotel confirmation. A prepaid car voucher. My attorney's card. "Your driver is here in 5 minutes," I said. "Use the hotel tonight. Your lawyer can contact mine tomorrow. If you choose not to fly, that is your decision. But you are not walking back into my house and rehearsing innocence in my kitchen." Her face hardened a little then, hurt giving way to anger because anger is easier to carry when shame is heavy. "Your house." I met her eyes. Yes. It was the first truly honest possessive I had used in years. She said my name once more, but this time it sounded less like appeal and more like accusation. I didn't wait to see which direction it would choose. I opened the car door, got in, and told the valet thank you. As we pulled away, I looked back exactly once. Claire was still standing under the awning in the black dress, holding the envelope with both hands like it might burn through her skin. City light caught the wet tracks on her face. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Not because I diminished her. Because secrets take up enormous space while they are hidden. Once exposed, they collapse. I didn't go home right away. I drove north along the lake with the windows cracked and no music on. My phone vibrated 5 times. Claire. Then twice from an unknown number I assumed was Evan. I didn't answer either. At 11:08 Marcus texted, "You okay?" I wrote back, "Done." He replied, "Proud of the way you handled it." I wasn't proud yet. Pride comes later. That night, the house was impossibly quiet. No shoes by the back door except mine. No half-drunk glass of sparkling water on her bedside table. No serum bottles lined up with military precision on the bathroom counter because I had packed the essentials out and left the rest for inventory. I slept 3 hours. At 6:32 the next morning Claire texted. "Can we please talk before I decide anything?" I stared at it, then put the phone down. At 7:05 Marcus sent another message. "Counsel has not been contacted yet. Hold position. Hold position. Operational language. Clinical. Useful." By 8:10 a.m., Claire had sent 6 more texts, escalating from apology to explanation to blame to fear and back again. "I never stopped loving you. This got out of control. You were never home. I know how this looks. Please don't make permanent decisions because of one terrible mistake. I don't know what I'm doing." That last one was the truest. At 11:47 a.m., a number from Seattle called me twice and left no voicemail. At 1:15 p.m., Marcus called. "She retained counsel. They have the filing. They're asking for access to personal belongings and proposing a temporary meeting next week. Also, she did not board the flight." I sat back in my chair at work and stared at the glass wall of my office. Didn't board? No. And him? No idea, Marcus said. But if I were guessing, the romantic architecture of this thing probably looked less glamorous once legal paperwork entered the lobby. I thanked him and hung up. That evening I drove home and stood in the kitchen where all of it had started. The sugar bowl. The basil plant, now more dead than alive. The stretch of countertop where her phone had glowed with another man's confidence. I expected triumph. What I felt was exhaustion so deep it almost felt holy. Because revenge, if that's what you want to call controlled disclosure, is never as satisfying as people imagine. It doesn't restore innocence. It doesn't hand you back the unbroken version of your memories. It just closes the gap between what is true and what is being pretended. That closure matters. But it is not joy. Over the next 2 months, the practical demolition continued. Attorneys. Inventories. Mediation. Account statements. Claire's lawyer argued for broader access to marital funds. Marcus responded with documents. The storage unit contents turned out to be clothes, decor items, a framed print from our hallway, 2 suitcases, and 3 boxes labeled office. There was no hidden fortune, no elaborate theft, just the banal logistics of disloyalty. Evan, according to information that surfaced during disclosures and through a mutual acquaintance who had no idea why I suddenly cared, did not, in fact, have a beautifully curated new life waiting in Seattle. He had a short-term consulting arrangement, a furnished rental, inconsistent income, and a habit of describing instability as freedom. Claire moved into a 1-bedroom in Bucktown after staying with a friend for several weeks. The divorce moved faster than people expected because there was nothing left to negotiate emotionally that hadn't already been burned to the frame. She asked to meet me twice outside formal channels. I declined the first. Accepted the second. Not because I wanted reconciliation. Because by then enough time had passed that I was curious what truth looked like when it had nowhere left to hide. We met in November at a coffee shop on Southport where we had once spent a snowy Saturday arguing about whether we could ever move somewhere warm and still feel like ourselves. She was wearing a camel coat and looked tired in a way expensive skincare cannot address. I sat across from her and noticed immediately that she no longer looked like the future to me. That was a relief. She wrapped both hands around her cup and said, "I know I don't deserve this conversation." I said nothing. She took a breath. I wanted to tell myself I wasn't using you. I really did. I kept framing it as waiting for the right time, or not wanting to hurt you before I knew what I wanted, or being confused. But the truth is I liked the safety. I liked the house and the structure and knowing nothing could go too wrong while I figured myself out. There are confessions that arrive like gifts and confessions that arrive like receipts. This was the second kind. She kept talking. With Evan, I felt chosen in this reckless, intense way. With you, I felt held. And instead of understanding that held is rare and valuable, I treated it like something that would remain available no matter what I did. I looked out the window at people passing with shopping bags and scarves and coffee they were drinking too hot because winter makes people impatient. Then I asked the only question I still cared about. Did you ever love me while you were planning to leave? She cried quietly before answering. Yes. But not well enough. That sentence has stayed with me. Not because it comforted me. Because it was accurate. A lot of damage in this world is done by people who feel something real and still refuse to let reality discipline their behavior. Love, when it is undisciplined, becomes appetite with prettier language. I left after 20 minutes. She did not ask me to stay. By December, the divorce was final. The house remained mine. The accounts were divided according to documentation and law, not fantasy. The bonus she waited for had already been allocated to taxes, investments, repairs. And a charitable gift to a literacy program my mother still volunteers with on Tuesdays. I kept the basil plant in the kitchen for no good reason long after it was clearly dead. Maybe I needed a visible reminder that neglect can happen slowly and still end completely. People who heard a simplified version of what happened tended to ask the same question. How did you stay calm? I usually gave them the convenient answer. Experience. Discipline. Good legal advice. All of that is true. But the deeper answer is less flattering and more useful. I stayed calm because the moment I saw those messages, I understood that panic would only make me easier to manage. Someone who lies to you for that long has already built a working model of your reactions. If you explode on schedule, you become one more thing they predicted correctly. I could not stop Claire from betraying me. I could stop participating in the script she had written for what happened after. That was the only power worth respecting. 3 months after the divorce, I ran into Claire's mother at a charity dinner. She looked older. Softer around the mouth. She touched my arm and said, "I hope you know we always thought highly of you." I nearly admired the sentence for its economy. I said, "That's kind of you." What I didn't say was that esteem offered after damage is often just reputation trying to save itself. Later that night, a woman I had met twice through work asked whether I wanted to join a group heading to another bar. I declined, went home, changed into sweats, and spent an hour assembling a bookshelf I had been meaning to build for weeks. It was the first piece of furniture in the house that existed with no memory attached to Claire's opinion. That mattered more than the charity dinner. Healing, as it turns out, is often embarrassingly domestic. A shelf. Fresh towels. Different coffee mugs. Deleting one person's emergency contact and adding your sister instead. Learning that the silence in your house is not accusation, just space. Eating on the couch if you feel like it because no one is there to call it sloppy. Sleeping diagonally across the bed one night simply because you can. I started going for long walks again, the kind I used to take before marriage when I needed to think through a problem without talking it to death. Along the lake, through Oak Park side streets, past front porches with old men reading newspapers and kids throwing tennis balls at garage doors. I relearned my own company in increments. And because life has a warped sense of symmetry, it was on one of those walks that I saw Claire for the last time before this story ends. It was early spring. Windy. One of those gray afternoons that makes the whole city look half-erased. She was outside a home goods store, carrying 2 paper bags and wearing a denim jacket over a white sweater. Evan wasn't with her. No one was. We both slowed. Then stopped. Up close, she looked like someone who had spent months being confronted by the practical cost of romantic fantasy. Not destroyed. Just corrected. "Daniel," she said. "Claire." For a second neither of us moved. Traffic passed behind her in short wet bursts. She looked at me and gave a small sad smile. "You look well." I was, mostly. "Thank you." She glanced down, then back up. "I heard your company promoted you." I nodded. "COO as of February." She smiled again, and this time there was no angle in it. Just recognition. "You always land on your feet." I thought about correcting that. Telling her landing implies a fall, and what I had really done was remain standing while the ground shifted. Instead I said, "I work hard." She exhaled and tightened her grip on the bags. I was wrong about a lot of things. I looked at her and realized I no longer needed details. Most apologies arrive too late not because time has passed, but because the person hearing them no longer requires them as oxygen. I said, "I know." There were another 10 possible lines after that. We could have unpacked blame, regret, history, the anatomy of that last month, whether she had loved him, whether he had loved her, whether either of those questions mattered. I chose mercy instead. Not for her. For me. "Take care of yourself, Claire." "You too," she said. Then we kept walking in opposite directions. That was it. No thunder. No music. No final collapse to justify the years. Just 2 people leaving the radius of a mistake from opposite sides. If there is any lesson in what happened, it isn't that you should become suspicious of every late text or every password change or every spouse who suddenly starts asking about your bonus schedule. Life is too long and too miserable to live like a private investigator inside your own kitchen. The lesson is simpler. When truth arrives, believe it the first time. Not because belief makes it hurt less. Because denial only turns your pain into unpaid labor. And if someone is willing to use your steadiness as cover while they plan their exit, then your calm is no longer something to offer them for free. Use it instead to protect what is yours. Your name. Your dignity. Your future. Those 30 days changed me in ways I didn't fully understand until much later. They made me less eager to be admired for reliability. More careful about where generosity goes. Less interested in being seen as the strong one if strength only means making betrayal comfortable for other people. They also made me grateful, strangely enough, for every ordinary skill I once thought made me boring. Attention. Patience. Record keeping. Follow through. The ability to remain functional while someone else becomes erratic. Those are not glamorous traits. They are, however, the traits that saved my life from becoming her story about why leaving was necessary. A year after the divorce, I hosted my parents for dinner in the same kitchen where Claire's phone had once lit up my whole future in 3 messages. My mother brought a pie because she thinks arriving empty-handed is morally adjacent to shoplifting. My father stood by the sink and complained about the faucet pressure like he hadn't spent half his life fixing every fixture in every relative's house within 40 miles. The house felt different then. Not lonely. Mine. After dessert, my mother looked around the kitchen and said, "It feels peaceful in here." I smiled and said, "Yeah. It does." She didn't ask why that sentence hit me so hard. Good parents often know when not to turn meaning into interrogation. Later, after they left, I rinsed plates, wiped down the counters, and looked at the place where the sugar bowl used to sit. I'd replaced it months earlier with a wooden tray holding olive oil, salt, and a small plant that was somehow still alive under my care. Funny what changes. Funny what doesn't. I still wake early. I still make coffee before the sun is fully up. I still stand in that kitchen sometimes with one hand wrapped around a mug and think about how close I came to living the rest of my life inside someone else's timing. 30 more days. That was the phrase that started it. But it wasn't the phrase that defined the end. The end was defined by this. I knew. I stayed calm. And when the time came, I let the truth speak in my voice, not hers. That's how I remained the perfect husband for 30 more days. And that's why, when it was over, I was still able to remain myself.